This talk is about effective revision. Do you currently use your time intelligently? When you revise, do you give yourself the best possible chance of ensuring you retain as much information as possible? Are there ways in which you can work even more smartly? Effective revising. The adjective is important here. There's no point revising, in inverted commas, if what you do doesn't result in information being retained. I've lost count of the number of pupils I've come across over the years who've told me that they've spent the afternoon revising, only to find out that actually this has meant they've spent a few hours lying on their bed in their study perusing a textbook whilst dutifully checking Facebook updates each time an alert is sounded. How much information will this person have actually retained? Have they really been revising? Now I'm going to hold my hand up here and confess that I'm terrible at physics. So I'm not going to attempt to lecture you on the subject content of physics. However, whatever the subject, there are certain processes you can do to take control of future success. There's nothing wrong with having a weakness in a particular area. We all will have that. However, there is something wrong in not doing something about it. So, I find physics difficult. On the first Monday of the holidays, I open the textbook and read through all those points about SI units and maths. I've already started revising, so I think. And indeed I have, but it is generally recognised that reading alone will only result in around 20% of the information being retained. In other words, the vast majority of it will be pretty instantaneously forgotten. A more systematic approach is needed. Rewind. It is the first Monday of the holidays, and I open the textbook at the contents page. It's overwhelming. Yes, I've scored reasonably on the physics department's occasional tests, but I've been told that my scores equate to a B grade. More work will be needed to achieve my target grade of an A star. I decide I will pick one section, the one I've always found most difficult, thermal effects. I zoom in on this section. I now go through each individual subtopic. Actually, this is reassuring. With a little referencing of each subtopic, I find that I'm pretty secure on a fair amount of these topics, such as moving particles and temperature. But there are 3 which I half know, and 2 which I can remember virtually nothing about. I mark those with red lines, and the ones that I half know with orange squiggles. I decide to start with one of these red topics, the ones that I can remember virtually nothing about, liquids and vapours. I read it, and perhaps because I recognise it as a topic I'm weak on, I retain a little more information, 25% say. But at this point I've got a veritable head of steam, and so after reading the page I ignore the Facebook alert to whip out a flashcard that my mother has purchased in a frenzied fit of parental zeal. Rather than copy out phrases, I think, what are the key points, before writing them below. The keywords are in red to make them stand out from the rest of the sentence. My learning is becoming more efficient. But my mother has also purchased a box to store the flashcards. I know that I'm producing something that matters, something that will be useful, something that will be stored, something that will be referred to again. In a further 2 weeks, I will look back at these flashcards and test myself on what I have remembered. Perhaps my retention rate then will have increased to 75%. But flashcards don't suit everyone. Yes, it can help the memory process knowing that your notes are to be stored and are so portable, but I know some of you prefer to write out your notes on A4 and store them within a file. Let's have a look at an example. On the left you can see some helpful printed notes on redox reactions provided by the chemistry department. On the right you can see the notes the pupil has made to help learn and consolidate the information. What I really like about these notes is that they're so much clearer than the original. As you can see from the green circle, the equations in the original are cramped together, making the information harder to absorb. Whereas on the right, the pupil has spaced out the equations and colour-coded the copper as red and zinc as green. Come the summer, think how many pages of notes you will have. Many of you will have literally hundreds. How easy is it to wade through page after page of black biro writing, page after page of endless sentences, and take in what you are revising? Now think about revising from notes which are presented with some degree of variety. It may be colour, as in this example. It may be switching from bullet points to mind maps, paragraphs to diagrams, or ideally a combination of all of them. This information will be far more attractive and much easier to absorb. Not only this, the extra few seconds spent changing colour pen in itself keeps your brain alert and helps guard against working on autopilot, during which period, of course, you are unlikely to take in as much information. What I also like about these notes is that useful facts haven't just been blindly copied out. Not the whole time, but frequently the pupil has rephrased the information, and in doing so he has already begun to consolidate the learning. And so the sentence, the benefit of writing ionic equations and thus eliminating spectator ions, can clearly be seen here as it gives us a much clearer picture of what is going on, becomes in his notes easier to see as an ionic equation. The advantages of rephrasing are obvious. When we copy, it is purely a physical, mechanical operation, with any thinking taking place at the same time being an added bonus. However, when we rephrase, we are forced to think about the meaning of the sentence, and this thinking inevitably results in a greater amount of learning being absorbed. It takes longer, but it's worth it. I think there's something to be said for investing in a good quality book. A4 notes stored within folders are fine, of course, but there is something about opening a good quality hardback book which makes me personally want to fill it with intelligent thoughts. The system also has the advantage that notes are already filed. There is no chance of losing a page here or there. You would doubtless be excited to learn that this hardback book belongs to someone within your year group. Why don't we head inside through the keyhole-esque to discover more about how this pupil works? Russian notes. And once again, it is clear that some thought has gone into how this particular pupil has decided to learn key grammatical points. Firstly, I would suggest that the fact he is writing within a good hardback book means that he's making additional effort with presentation, which means that it will be easier to revise from, but also that whilst writing, he is likely to be memorising more effectively. Once again, we have the use of colour, with some dreadful gender stereotyping seen through the use of blue for masculine nouns, red for feminine. However, provided the pupil sticks to this system throughout the book, it should make revising different noun endings much easier and quicker. But what I also like is the additional thought and effort within the overview of cases section. It's very easy just to recite nouns in Latin, French, German, etc. in order. Think Latin and the noun for king, rex, rex, regem, regis, regi, rege. But how many of us learn them just as a clump, in sequential order, meaning that we lose time in an exam when we are required to just use, for example, a noun in the accusative case. By taking the trouble to think about the meaning of these cases, to make absolutely sure we can recall quickly that a phrase such as of the book will require a noun in the genitive case, we are facilitating the use of the correct case within a pressurised examination context. Once you've got to know the syllabus in each subject and you've worked out the topics you need to spend more time on, the next step then is to practice exam technique. As I'm sure you're aware, past papers can be found within the websites of the relevant exam board. Here, the majority of exams are run by Cambridge International Examination. Their website is www.cie.org.uk. Within the home page, navigate to the Cambridge Secondary 2 section and click on Cambridge IGCSE. You then choose your subject and click on the section entitled Past Papers. This should show both question papers and answers. In some ways, making notes in geography, science or religious studies, say, is straightforward. You have a huge number of facts which you need to learn. But what about learning vocabulary? We've already seen some work done on this and Russian nouns. What other strategies can be employed to ensure that your mind stays alert and alive when faced with an intimidatingly long list of words to learn? So let's look at some French. This is a page from Tricolor, and I've decided to spend 20 to 30 intensive minutes every other day boosting my vocabulary. Any longer than that, and I'm liable to get bored and switch off. It's after lunch on Monday on the first day of the holidays, and I decide to begin with one section from the back of the book, Health and Fitness. Once again, I want to assess my existing knowledge before copying words out endlessly. So I tick in green those words I've been learning since year Z and know like the back of my hands. I'm already thinking about what I'm doing, engaging my brain, ensuring that any time spent is useful. I know bouche means mouth, cœur, heart, genou, knee, and beyond ticking these words, I don't need to spend a second longer thinking about them. But there are some words that I half know. Cheville for ankle, that double LE ending. I've spelt that wrong in the past. Figure for face. I think I've previously had trouble remembering this because of the English word figure, which means the shape of the human body in general as opposed to just the face. There's also some tricky vowel spellings. 3 vowels in a row for joue for cheek and peau for skin. I've made mistakes on those previously. There are even some words that I can't recall coming across before. I mark these in red. And so I write out these orange and red words. Note the use of different text size to create a hierarchy. I put estomac, oeil and oreille in larger letters because I know that I'm less familiar with them. These will stand out on the page from the words I half know, thus making it a little easier for me to look out for and remember them. I could start robotically copying out and covering these words, but I want to engage my brain a little more first. And so I look through the list of French words and try to anticipate potential errors. Any strange spellings that we wouldn't normally come across in English. Any odd-looking to my amateur eye combination of letters. I highlight these in pink so that I am drawn to them and are a little less likely to make mistakes in these areas. And so the copying and thinking begin. I continue with my pink highlighting and meticulously check that I'm copying the word correctly. It's now time to cover the French up and test myself. Pretty good. 8 out of 12 on the orange words and 2 out of 3 on the red. Rather than just putting a cross, I put a red square around the error area and take a green highlighter to mark the same part of the word within my original list. I say these words out loud to myself and once again zoom in on the part of the word in which I've made a mistake. I don't feel I need to test myself again on the entire list, so I just have another go at the 5 words I spelt incorrectly. I decide to underline the part of the word in which I made the error to once again visually reinforce the correct spelling. I suspect this is the method the majority of you use, and in general it works very well. However, problems come when we get too used to a certain approach. By definition, the brain needs to be engaged when learning and memorising. Working on autopilot is unlikely to be hugely successful. Especially when you're a bit tired, a bit stressed, it can be well worth experimenting with different approaches. Learning parts of the body, for example, lends itself naturally to images. How many thousands of words do we come across every day, either within lessons, the internet, newspapers, textbooks? But how many words do we come across that are contained within images? As you can see, I'm a terrible drawer. But by taking the trouble to draw a shaky hand and write 2 words within it, I'm creating a more memorable learning experience. My mind has a greater chance of remembering a picture of a hand with its corresponding French words, rather than 3 doigts copied blindly across a scrap of A4. And how about this rather gruesome face? There are 2 eyes, so I take the opportunity to write oeil twice in both eyes, whilst the teeth look memorably rotten and have been labelled as dents. Yes, this approach takes longer, but if you're tired, if you know that you struggle to learn vocabulary, then occasionally thinking about presenting vocabulary within images can provide the variation needed for efficient memorization. When learning vocabulary, we can potentially learn 15 different words as separate individual strands and try to commit them to long-term memory. Or we can spend a few moments grouping them so that they can potentially be stored more efficiently. In this example, a pupil has spent some time categorizing his Greek vocabulary and has noticed that 3 words begin with apo. He decides that he will learn these words as a 3 and adds the figure of a man with what appears to be a bloody sword to reflect the Greek words meaning die and kill. Crucially, the pupil is engaging with his vocabulary before attempting to learn it, and therefore he's more likely to remember the words. It's probably an inaccurate cliche to say that we don't have accents in English, but we certainly have fewer than the French. I know I frequently forget accents, and so I decide to categorise my words into those with 1 acute accent, 2 acute accents, and those with a circumflex, etc. I already know what the words mean, so there's no need to waste time writing out the English meaning. I then learn the words in groups: préfère, téléphone, and désolé. I learn together as having 2 acute accents. When I test myself, I use the same grid and find that on this occasion, I don't make any mistakes. Does your study area look anything like this? Is it possible that this pupil loses a significant amount of time due to an inefficient working environment? But if you look within the top right-hand corner of the photograph, you can see that actually the pupil has a good system for organising his work into different subjects. He has metal storage boxes with some labels showing maths, physics, Latin. What a good idea. However, one of the labels is coming off and another one hasn't got a label, and given the proliferation of papers on the desk and folders elsewhere, having set up the system, the pupil is clearly no longer using it so diligently. So let's say he wants to find notes made recently in physics, a toy time completed in maths, or a coursework plan in English. A couple of minutes wasted every half hour adds up very quickly during the pressurised run-up to summer exams. But not only this, what about the effect of concentration? Try sitting down and completing some work within a clean, ordered space, and compare that with a metaphorical jungle. A calm, ordered environment makes it easier for your mind to be similarly calm and ordered, and therefore work to the best of your ability. Here's another study. Is it accurate, but perhaps cheesy, to say that this particular pupil is set up slightly better to succeed? This time, folders and textbooks can be accessed relatively easily, although a few folders remain on the desk from the previous evening's toy time or the day's lessons. I wonder, again, whether it's easier to think and concentrate within a less cluttered area. Generally, your desks are pretty big. There should be plenty of space to be able to have your laptop on one side and still have the other side free for non-WordPress work and revision. In the final section of today's talk, I'd like to explore revision schedules, or, as the title reads, using time intelligently. Why set up a revision schedule for the holiday before you go home? There are so many reasons, but to me it boils down to control. Control over parental pressure. You already have a detailed plan for the holidays, suggesting that you can and should be left to get on with it without remorseless nagging. Control over known weaknesses. You've already gone through the different syllabi and worked out which subjects need more work. This plan allows you to address these weaknesses. And control over that nagging voice in your head, which suggests that putting off revising for just one more day won't do any harm. And one first step towards taking control could be setting your own realistic, attainable target grades, if you've not already done this. By now, you will know what you're capable of getting in a subject if you decide to put enough work in. You don't need a teacher to tell you that. And so in this example, I take a step back and think about my different subjects. In art, the coursework takes up a significant percentage of the overall grade, and that's going really well. I write down A star. I've also found biology easy, and I've got an excellent Don in geography I get on well with. A stars for both of them. French is a subject I've always found difficult and know deep inside that I haven't spent enough time learning vocabulary over the past 3 years. I will start doing more work on that, but realistically I'll struggle to get higher than a B. In English I've done 2 out of the 3 coursework pieces and have been pretty happy with them. However, chatting to boys last year, they claim that it is extremely hard to get an A star in the examination. I go for a conservative A grade. Having drawn up my target GCSE grades, I look at an overview of the holidays. Can you believe that we have 26 days of holiday this time around? Brilliant. And you certainly don't want to spend every day revising. So first, write in rest days, travelling days, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and plan around them. It's vital to recharge the batteries as well as use time intelligently. Next, I set up my list of subjects so that I can plan which subject to revise on which day. Note that this particular revision schedule is in Excel, meaning that the number of hours to be revised on each subject can be totaled automatically, once more keeping you calmer and in control. I decide to enter both my start time and the total amount of time I will spend revising on that particular day. I dislike vocabulary learning intensely, but I know it's a weakness. I'm not that keen on getting up early, but 10 a.m. feels manageable. So I decide to plan for a maximum of 30 minutes a day learning French vocabulary. For me, this is the optimal time period. Any longer, and I know I begin to switch off. Doing half an hour 3 times a week enables me to clock up a fair amount of time. 5.5 hours already. Let's now move to the sciences. I feel as though I can concentrate in longer bursts in the sciences and have done reasonably well on the tests so far this term. I decide to go for an hour and a half twice a week in each of the 3 sciences, although I reduce it to an hour and a half once during the week of Christmas itself. I'm more alert in the morning than the evening, and so pencil these sessions in for 10:30 following my vocabulary work in French. In general, I try to avoid weekends, although by keeping Christmas Day and Boxing Day free, those days will be the equivalent to a weekend. Making science notes or practicing past papers is completely different to learning vocabulary, and I hope that the contrast between the 2 activities will keep my brain active. Let's have a look at the subtotals per subject. 10.5 hours in biology, 9 hours in chemistry, and 7.5 hours in physics, plus 5.5 hours allocated to learning French vocab. And so far I have days off at the beginning and the end, and in the middle around the Christmas period. Up to this point, I've only used the time slot 10 a.m. to midday. Now on to mathematics. I've got some excellent examples written down in my book, but I know that further practice would make the mock significantly easier. And so I decide to set aside 6 sessions to do 60 minutes work, looking at practice papers downloaded and printed out from the CIE website, referencing the examples in my exercise book. This is of course the holidays, and so I allow myself 2 hours for an indolent lunch before starting work again at 2 p.m. Back to the subtotals. 38.5 hours work in total. Now that to me sounds a lot, and yet I currently have 4 consecutive days off around Christmas, and the most work I've planned so far in a single day is 3 hours. Next up, Latin. Consistently my lowest grade in intermediates, and one I've been desperately putting off revising. No more. I decide to split the revising into 2 sections. Firstly, learning to practice translating the set texts. An occasional hour in the afternoon when I'm not doing maths should be sufficient. As with maths, I decide to go for 6 one-hour slots. But I also need time to revise vocabulary and grammar, so I pencil in 30 minutes for this to take place on a different day, after maths. My totals are now really starting to add up. Now we have 47.5 hours, an impressive total which still gives me plenty of time to relax and recuperate. As an English teacher, I'm infuriated by the oft-repeated claim that you can't prepare for English. You can. Most of your time this term will have been spent on coursework, meaning that some further examination familiarisation is bound to be useful. The CIE mark scheme looks at your range of punctuation, vocabulary, sentence structures, all things that can be practiced by referring to past papers. It can also be worthwhile practicing writing summaries of newspaper or magazine articles. Nonetheless, I probably don't need as much time on English as I do other subjects, so I pencil in 3 one-hour sessions. In art, everything is in hand, but in geography I estimate that 5 45-minute sessions, making notes on case studies and producing flashcards of key terminology will be sufficient. And here's how my totals look. Over 54 hours of work, yet I still maintain it should allow for a relaxing, enjoyable holiday. This is confirmed by looking at an outline of the holidays. It still looks reasonably civilised. First day of the holidays off, first Sunday afternoon of the holidays off, the weekend before Christmas, just 2.5 hours on the Saturday morning, 4 days off for Christmas including Christmas Day and Boxing Day, never more than 3.5 hours work in an individual day, latest finishing time 3:45, but generally it's 3 p.m. The January GCSE mock examinations. Yes, those glorious reminders of how easy it is to show your intelligence, provided you've put the time and work in. Those assessments which will facilitate your progression into the far more interesting and intellectually demanding world of pre-U's. Those means through which you can persuade your parents to fund your trip to X, your naughty night out with Y, and your cosy tete-a-tete meal with Z. Those useful indicators of your understanding within a subject. They start in 34 days. Many thanks for listening.